Hey everybody, this is Matt from the Old Soul Piper. I am enjoying the Cornishman, taking a break from working on my farm today. It is a really nice day out and gets you outside, gets you working, but I'm taking a break. It's probably my favorite part of working outside, just taking a break in the shop and having a little pipe with my stash over here. I like English blends, and I really like, if you watch my other video about my vent cover in my office, you'll obviously notice I had 2 tins of early morning pipe pinned up on there. Definitely like English blends. I like aromatics, but I've kind of pulled away from them, and I really enjoy early morning pipe. But I really like the guys from Country Squire. I've never been there. I live in Idaho. They're in Jackson, Mississippi. But I like them, kind of admire them. Used to listen to their show, and then I hear them on other interviews. So I researched their catalog, looked at their different English blends, and had them send me out some of this Cornishman, and really liked it. So I think I'm expecting my 3rd or 4th delivery of it here soon. So I really like it, and it's my go-to when I get up in the morning, head up to the office after coffee or have coffee or whatever and work at the computer for a little while. I'm having Cornishman. And then if I have another pipe later in the day, you know, I'll have something else. I'll have that baby's bottom you saw, or I might have some aromatic. I've still got aromatic in jars, and so I'll try and finish it off and stuff like that. So anyway, but that's what I'm having in this old corn cob from Missouri Meerschaum, and happy to have you here. I wanted to talk to you about what's going on with our stock market and with the economy. Me as an investor, this is drawing a lot of my attention, and I watch the stock market daily, and I know I probably shouldn't, but I do, and I watch it frequently. And this last week has been just absolutely, I don't know, scary, catastrophic if it doesn't change. I personally think it will, but I'm not an investment advisor or anything like that. But it did make me think of one of the reasons that I named this channel Old Soul Piper. Now, you're probably not familiar with me, but this June will be 1 year since I stopped podcasting. I had a full-time podcasting business for a decade, from 2014 through last June of 2024, and that was my full-time job. We have our farm here in Idaho, but my source of off-farm income was my podcasting business, and that was the name of the podcast. And 10 years I did, oh my goodness, I think I did about 2,500 episodes. I did a lot of contract podcasting. I did like contract interviewing for other radio shows and podcasts and things like that. If any of you listen to Sirius XM, if you ever listen to rural radio, which is Sirius XM 147, you might still hear me giving crime prevention tips to farmers on there if they're still running those. Last I knew they were. But anyway, that's what I did for 10 years. And probably 5 years ago, I did an episode on there on why those of us who like rural lifestyles, like small towns, like that type of thing, why we're so lucky. And at that time, I was looking around at what was going on with housing prices and things like that out there where I live near Boise, Idaho. We've had housing prices skyrocket here and a ton of development and things like that. And I was looking at cities in our regions like Seattle, Portland, Salt Lake City, and then hearing news about places around the rest of the country as well. I'm gonna get this going again. So I did this episode and just basically talked about how lucky we are, those of us in this audience on the Off Farm Income podcast, which was agricultural and rural in its nature, how lucky we were to value rural living. Because as a result of me doing the podcast and me traveling, you know, I'd come into a lot of rural communities, and I'd interviewed a lot of people from rural communities around the U.S. I interviewed universities from rural communities around the U.S. And what I found is that if you're willing to live rural, man, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity out there for you that doesn't cost a lot of money. And so it could really take the stress and the headache off of a person if they have those rural values. And what I'm talking about is going into communities, and they do exist, going into communities, which at the time, going into communities where you could work a decent job and you'd have good neighbors and people of good values, and you could cash flow a house. You could buy a house for $35,000, $50,000. And if you don't believe me, I can tell you towns around Texas, towns throughout the Midwest to look at where this is absolutely possible. Now, that's about 5 years ago, so they might be $65,000 or $75,000 right now. But my whole point was not housing prices. That's just what kind of got me thinking about it. But my whole point was, if you like to live in a small town, if you like rural people, if you are good with your entertainment on a Friday night, being going out to the local cafe, seeing your friends and your neighbors, and then going to the high school football game or going to the high school basketball game or something like that, and that slower pace of life, that less quote unquote sophisticated way of life, if that's what you enjoy, man, you're fortunate. You were in a fortunate position because you didn't have to deal with this crisis of these skyrocketing housing prices, because those were only happening where people were flooding into. But if you were willing to live in one of these rural communities, well, you could be insulated from that. You could be just as happy. You'd probably be more happy, more content, and you wouldn't have the stress that so many people were complaining about financially. So when the stock market did what it did last week, and I'm recording this early April 2025, April 6th. So if you want to look up the history of what the stock market did last week, with all this talk about tariffs and things like that, I got to thinking about this again, and I got to thinking about who I'm trying to talk to with this channel and why I named it Old Soul Piper. And that is, it's not just for rural people. Cat's trying to jump on my lap there. It's not just for rural people. It's for people who have that old soul, whose values are similar to those who are rural or who are rural, who they enjoy the simple things in life, the things in life that are free. They enjoy spending their Saturday rather than going somewhere and spending a bunch of money on an activity, doing a craft or a project in the shop or, in their craft room or something like that, and making something that's productive that actually ends up saving them money. And it's really the same mindset. So I got to thinking about that, and I assume that anybody who's going to watch videos on this channel are going to be people that think that way, just because of the name of the channel. And it's a really, really fortunate position to be in right now. And I'll tell you how it impacted me. So I'm still rural, although the city is encroaching upon us, but we have our farm and we have our cattle and our goats and our chickens and garden and orchard and all of that type of stuff. So we're kind of an old school type of farm. We're not production agriculture. Although I've definitely supported production agriculture through my podcast when I was hosting Off-Farm Income. But that's kind of where we're at, even though we've got urban kind of encroaching upon us on our farm. But when this is going on in the stock market last week, and I'm looking at our investments and seeing what's going on and wondering what's going to happen with the economy and all this talk about recession and all of this type of stuff, I got to thinking about our lifestyle, and I got to thinking about the things that bring us pleasure, and working on the farm, doing things that are productive. They make this ground better. We're producing beef for people, and we're selling beef, and we're still able to do that. And if we get off the farm, going and sitting out next to this camper that's behind me along a river in the mountains of Idaho, or in the winter maybe running down to Arizona and parking this thing next to a cactus and just kind of sitting out there in the sun. Just very, very simple, inexpensive things that the old soul kind of desires. And it's an interesting question, because I don't know if my grandparents, I don't know if they were constantly, well, I kind of do, but I don't know how they felt about chasing the next fancier car or the bigger house or whatever that may be. Excuse me for a second. Sorry about that. Thought I heard somebody pulling up. I wasn't expecting anybody. Anyway, thinking about my grandparents, I don't know that they were trying to keep up with the Joneses or weren't, or they were chasing the next big thing. Quite honestly, back then in the 50s and the 60s and even the 70s, there wasn't as much to buy, and there wasn't as much ability to try and impress other people with your material possessions. So I don't know if they were, exactly like me when it comes to this, but here's what I do know. When I say old soul, what I'm talking about is just basically, I'm just drawn to looking backwards rather than forwards. When it comes to the things that I want to do with my life and the way I want to spend my time and the things I want to do for entertainment and pleasure, they cost very, very little money, because I kind of look back and I go, I would have been fine living right there and just kind of stopping time right there. That might have been the mid 50s, that might have been the early 60s, maybe the mid 70s, late 70s, something like that. Every different era's got its pros and its cons, but anytime I think about this, they've all got something in common, and that is less materialism, less consumerism, less being obsessed with buying stuff, less consumer debt, less keeping up with the Joneses, just less of that, more value placed on interpersonal relationships, people getting together to play cards, people getting together just to visit. In the town I grew up in, a small little town in the Central Valley of California, man, every evening when I was a kid, somebody went to somebody's house and they had a highball and they just visited face to face. And that was the social. There was no media about it. That was how you were social back then. And I miss that. I really would love to have that. And so if what happened last week has got you concerned, if it's got you worried, but you're on this channel because you're like me and you've kind of got these old values, these values you kind of wish time would have stopped 30 years ago or 40 years ago, 50 years ago, whatever it may be, take some comfort in that. Because if your financial house is in order, and if you are an old soul in this way, I would suspect that it is, or that you're working on getting there so you can concentrate on these types of things more than, the rat race to try and make money. If your financial house is in order and everything collapsed around us and your investments went to zero, if my investments went to zero, what would I be left with? Well, I'd be left with a lifestyle that was still very affordable and I really, really enjoyed. And if you're rural, if you're an old soul like me, if you're both, if you're one of the two, whatever it may be, I think that's one of the real benefits of looking at the world that way and looking at your life through that lens and through that perspective. So as I sit here in front of my 1976 Alaskan camper that I bought used and I love to go camping in, and my grandpa's old aluminum boat that's from 1956 or something like that, and I'm doing projects on the farm, and this is how I'm spending my weekend, I think about doing simple little things like taking the pleasure out of sitting down and having a pipe, and today having some Cornishman from the Country Squire, or whatever I may have tomorrow or this evening or whatever. And I think about that pleasure of just sitting there and enjoying being alive and enjoying what's around me and the things that are free. And at my place, at my farm, it's going to be our livestock. It'll be pheasant. It'll be the occasional deer. It'll be geese. It'll be birds of prey. And it's a great place to be, and it's a wonderful time of year. So yeah, this is scary what's going on, and it's concerning if you've been building wealth as an investor. But the bottom line is, if it all disappeared, would much change about the way you're living your life? And if the answer is no, because you like these simple things and these things that are free, well, take comfort in that and let that comfort you through this moment of turmoil, however long it is going to last. So I hope that helps, and that's kind of who I am and what I'm about, and that's been on my brain. So hopefully you can take some comfort from that. It certainly helped me to take comfort as I've thought about this and watched things plummet and kind of went, what difference does it make ultimately to me in my day-to-day life? And I don't know if it makes much. Have a good day, everybody.